Latest development there. Turkey now says it has captured a key Syrian border town, and video has emerged reportedly showing disturbing images of Kurdish prisoners being publicly executed. ABC's Ian Pannell is reporting for us from the Syrian-Turkish border.
Yeah, good morning, Eva. I want everyone to just look at the scene behind me, because these are just some of the 11,000 young men and women killed by ISIS. They were our allies. They fought and died protecting their homeland, but also our homeland. And now some of the worst fears of what would happen after US troops pulled out and Turkish forces started bombing are coming to pass. Breaking news for you this morning. We've just learned that 250 ISIS brides, 700 people in total, have escaped from a nearby refugee camp, prompting fears that ISIS is making a comeback. This morning, Turkey's brutal assault on US-backed Kurdish troops and civilians enters a new and bloody phase. Now, US Defense Secretary Mark Esper telling Face the Nation that the US is preparing to evacuate about 1,000 US troops remaining in northern Syria as safely and quickly as possible. This video, obtained by the New York Times, appears to show Kurdish prisoners lying on the ground moments before they're executed. And this video, tweeted by the same Turkish-backed Islamist militants, appears to show more captured Kurdish fighters, the conflict taking a radical sectarian turn. This Syrian hospital overflowing with burned and broken bodies. Tearful mourners paying respects to the lives lost, burying the victims as the Turkish offensive intensifies and the body count grows reportedly into the hundreds. Thousands of people have come out onto the streets to commemorate the people they see as martyrs. These are young YPG fighters killed defending their homeland from Turkey. The Kurdish-led Syrian Defense Forces desperately calling on its American allies to close northern Syrian airspace to Turkish warplanes. President Trump on Saturday releasing $50 million in aid to protect persecuted ethnic and religious minorities. But it's not this kind of aid they need. The SDF confirming to ABC News its commander has now told the US that if it won't stop the Turkish attack, the SDF will turn to Russia for help. Whit, I can tell you there are even more of those gruesome videos online, including the roadside assassination of a leading female Kurdish politician who was completely unarmed. The groups carrying this out work with Turkey, and they're now accused of prompting sectarian violence here, raising fears of what we're witnessing is de facto ethnic cleansing in northern Syria. Whit?
Disturbing developments on the ground there. Ian Pannell for us. Thank you.
We are following two very big stories this Sunday: the impeachment investigation and the president's decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, a move that has turned into an international crisis. We begin this morning with the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. Mr. Secretary, welcome to Face the Nation.
Good morning, Margaret. Thank you for having me.
The president pulled back from the border with Turkey, but there are still about 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria. Are you evacuating them?
Look, it's a very terrible situation over there, a situation caused by the Turks, by President Erdogan. Despite our opposition, they decided to make this incursion into Syria. And at this point in time, in the last 24 hours, we learned that they likely intend to expand their attack further south than originally planned and to the west. And so we know that's happening. We also have learned in the last 24 hours that the Syrian forces the Kurdish forces are looking to the SDF are looking to cut a deal, if you will, with the Syrians and the Russians to counterattack against the Turks in the north. And so what we find ourselves is we have American forces likely caught between two opposing advancing armies, and it's a very untenable situation. So I spoke with the president last night after discussions with the rest of the national security team, and he directed that we begin a deliberate withdrawal of forces from northern Syria.
A deliberate withdrawal from the entire country?
From northern Syria.
From northern Syria.
Right, which is where most of our forces are.
So the 1,000 troops,
that's
how
correct.
Long and over what time period will you be
Well,
pulling
it'll
back?
be a deliberate withdrawal, and we want to conduct it as safely and quickly as possible. So we want to make sure we deconflict a pullback of forces. We want to make sure we don't leave equipment behind. So I'm not prepared to put a timeline on it, but that's our general game plan.
You said you're doing this for U.S. force protection because of two advancing armies. Those armies are advancing after the U.S. had already pulled back, after the U.S. Air Force that had controlled the airspace stopped doing so.
Well, we still
Do you actually believe they would advance if U.S. forces were there in the numbers and with the force and with the commander-in-chief saying, don't do this?
I do, because in my lead up to talks with my counterpart of the past several weeks, I've been on the job a little bit over 2 months, it became very clear to me that the Turks were fully committed to conducting this incursion. The Turks were committed to doing this. This should not be a surprise. And if you go back in time to when we first began this relationship with the Syrian Kurds, at that time in 2014, the Turks were protesting at that moment.
Right.
And it's gone on, and since that time, they've actually implemented 3 incursions into northern Syria.
But do you actually believe Turkey would fire on U.S. forces? We are NATO allies.
Well, I don't know whether they would or they wouldn't. We have reports already of indiscriminate fire landing near American forces.
Was that accidental? Was that deliberate? Was that reckless?
We need to sort that out. We've given them the locations of our forces. But look, I've been to war. I know what war's like. There's a fog out there, and things happen. And we want to make sure we don't put our soldiers in a situation where they could be killed or injured. And look, even if the Turks decided not to attack forces, I mean, they got over 15,000 forces. What we decided to pull back from that immediate zone of attack was about less than 50, maybe 24 forces. It would be irresponsible for me to keep them in that position.
But you did have U.S. Air Force controlling the airspace.
And we still do. It was a coordinated arrangement between us and the Turks. And despite our protestations, despite the fact that we urged the Turks not to do this, they decided to do it. And we told them that we would not support them militarily in this action.
So how does that not amount to a retreat? You're saying that the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, said, don't do this, and then Erdogan said, I am, and he said, okay.
Well,
I'm not going to fire back. I'm going to pull back.
I wouldn't characterize it that way. What I'm saying is we did not want to put American forces into harm's way. We did not want to get involved in a conflict that dates back nearly 200 years between the Turks and the Kurds and get involved in yet another war in the Middle East.
Well, when it comes to the forces you're talking about, the SDF you referred to, you said it has developed in the last 24 hours that you've learned they've struck a deal with Russia.
Well, they're working on a deal. I don't know that it's been finalized yet, but we're pretty confident that they will go in that direction. Barring we're trying to make some last-minute interventions with President Erdogan, but again, my expectation is President Erdogan would not agree to a ceasefire. He would not agree to move back across the border, which we've been pushing him to do. And so there's every expectation that that the Syrian Kurds would cut a deal with the Syrian and Russian forces.
But to be clear, the reason the Syrian Kurds are striking a deal here is to protect themselves from being killed by Turkey.
That's right.
But that's what the United States was doing for them. They were our allies that we were advising and assisting and protecting. It sounds a lot like they were being left to be slaughtered. So what choice were they left other than to find someone else to protect them?
Look, the Kurds have been very good partners in the de-ISIS campaign. They were very good fighters on the battlefield. We obviously enabled that as well. But at the same time, we didn't sign up to fight the Turks on their behalf. And we've been very clear with them about that. That's why since I came into office over 2 months ago, I worked week after week with my defense minister counterpart from Turkey and urged them not to do this. We cited all the reasons that are now playing out, the biggest being the likely release of ISIS fighters from these camps and prisons. Not just that, we see a humanitarian crisis emerging. This relationship between the United States and Turkey is being damaged. Their standing in NATO and Europe is being hurt. We see European capitals coming out and criticizing President Erdogan for these actions. Everything that we told them, all the reasons why we told them not to do this are coming to bear.
And what price will they pay for it?
Well, we'll see over time. You see that some European countries are already talking about specific sanctions and actions. The president is talking about the same. We should expect to see something like that along those same lines.
Doesn't that just drive them into the arms of Russia?
I don't think so. We've got to see how this plays out. But again, we've got to take this one step at a time. It's a very fluid situation. It's changing by the hour.
Just in the past few hours online, there have been videos circulating, horrific videos showing execution of some of these Kurdish allies of ours. There are reports of hundreds of ISIS fighters and family members just running free. There are over 100,000 individuals fleeing this violence, according to the UN. Does the United States have any idea who these forces are that Turkey is sending in, who these militias are?
It's terrible. It's a terrible situation. We condemn it. We have condemned it. These are just the things that we told the Turks would happen and play out. Who's conducting it? It's unclear at this point in time. There are Turkish regular forces and there are Turkish proxy forces engaged as well.
And we don't know who they are?
We don't know. That's right. We don't know exactly who they all are and what they're doing, but we're hearing the same reports from the battlefield as well.
These are war crimes.
It appears to be, if true, that they would be war crimes.
European allies are looking at this, and when they hear the president say things like these ISIS fighters will just flee to Europe, they say that is not appreciating the alliance, that Turkey has been far too permissive in allowing ISIS fighters within its territory. They see this as inevitable that we are headed towards a terrorist attack because of this chaos that the U.S. is allowing in the vacuum.
Well, let's be clear. The United States is not allowing this. Turkey committed this action. They decided to make an incursion in northern Syria, despite our protestations, our urgings not to do it, all of our warnings. They decided to do it. The situation
but the
with
U.S.
ISIS
is being permissive, arguably, by pulling back and not stopping them.
We are doing what's in the interests of our service members, not to put them in harm's way, not to put 20, 30, 40 soldiers up against a 15,000-man army, which is using airstrikes, artillery, and ground forces to prosecute a war against the Turks, whose roots go back over 200 years.
If the U.S. is fired at, do forces have the ability to defend themselves? Can they fire back?
Absolutely. General Milley has made that clear to his counterpart. I made that clear to my counterpart. I warned them just the other day that they need to respect our positions on the ground. They need to respect our forces. And I reminded them that we have the right of self-defense, and we will execute it if necessary.
Very quickly, are you going to comply with the subpoena that the House provided you and provide documents to them regarding to the halt to military aid to Ukraine?
Yeah, we will do everything we can to cooperate with the Congress. Just in the last week or two, my general counsel sent out a note, as we typically do in these situations, to ensure documents are retained.
Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
You will comply with the subpoena?
We will do everything we can to comply.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Margaret.
We taped that interview a short time ago. Since then, our David Martin reports that a U.S. official has told him U.S. troops have already begun moving out of their positions in northern Syria. We'll have a report from Syria later on in the broadcast. But we want to go now to Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He is in Ottawa, Illinois. Good morning to you, Congressman.
Good morning.
You wanted the president to rethink his position. We know from Secretary Esper this decision to pull out was made last night. What is the implication going to be?
Well, it's going to be terrible, and the secretary is doing his job, and he has to follow orders. And but the reality, we all know that if there were still those 30 or 40 soldiers in that part of Syria, that Turkey wouldn't attack. We actually had a pretty good kind of joint security situation being set up to de-escalate that area. In fact, pulling back those 50 troops or whatever it was has given license to Turkey. And then now, I think pulling out the remaining 1,000 in Syria is simply an excuse to get out. Look at it this way. You hear the president and people like Rand Paul talk about endless wars all the time, and it's kitschy. But actually, we were preventing an endless war, and that actually commenced on Sunday now, a week ago. And so it's really depressing. And for me, as a guy that served in the military and really got into politics because of, I believe in the role America plays, to see this yet again, leaving an ally behind, abandoning people that we frankly told that we were going to be with is disheartening, depressing. Frankly, it's weak, and I don't see how it follows through on the president's promise, his biggest promise of the campaign, to defeat ISIS, because I think it is going to resurge.
Is the president putting U.S. national security at risk?
Yes, I think so, yeah. And I mean, look at what's going to happen out of here. Now, we have another group that now believes they can't rely on the United States. There's a lot of complication in the Kurd situation, and I've seen all this Russian misinformation now on the internet that's being picked up by some of these political blogs that these are the bad Kurds and there's good Kurds. Well, look, there are Kurds that aren't the best folks in the world, but there are also people that we have chosen to equip to fight ISIS, that we were with. We had created a situation in which there was stability. And out of an impulsive decision, I think that the president made, otherwise it was cold and calculated because he's been thinking about it for a while and nobody else knew. The Kurds found out on Twitter, for goodness sakes. We have left them to the wolves. And the message this is sending to our allies around the world, I think, is really going to be bad.
So what are Republicans in Congress going to do about it? Are you completely powerless?
No, we're not powerless. I mean, the president has a lot of power, though. And I said that no matter, even under President Obama, I said the president's got a lot of power. That's in the Constitution. The things we can do, we are going to do. We've got a resolution of condemnation, I think, next week, as well as some significant sanctions. The president tweeted about sanctions this morning, but I think he needs to make sure he's following through on them. And they're not going to be surface sanctions. They're going to really hit Turkey hard. And then the other thing we can do is be outspoken about this. The American people, who want strength and leadership, who were promised by this president that we would defeat ISIS, deserve to hear the truth and not these things like end with endless war that you hear some on the kind of libertarian spectrum talk about. There is now a war that's been commenced in Syria because we have pulled 50 troops out from being able to prevent that war.
You heard the secretary acknowledge war crimes. The State Department has said they're afraid of ethnic cleansing. So looking at all of that, aren't sanctions just punitive? They're not preventative?
Yeah.
Is there a responsibility here to do something?
Yeah, well, I think there is. I think it is not necessarily going to prevent Turkey from doing what they're doing. This has been Turkey's dream for a long time, and the president basically gave the green light to do it. They're going to be important, but I think we also have to continue to say this, which is when the United States backs away, chaos follows through. And we had a situation of stability there. It wasn't perfect. Erdogan probably didn't want to have to do joint patrols with the U.S. because he wanted to attack. But we're the United States of America, and we can prevent things like that. We have to remember the strength we have and not just try to run away from every conflict we could have.
So the Wall Street Journal had an editorial that was pretty strong here in sharply criticizing the president, quote, for his habit of impulsive judgment, and they argued that his judgment can be so reckless that many voters who took a risk on him the first time will ask if he's worth a second gamble in 2020. Impeachment won't defeat Donald Trump in 2020, but Donald Trump might. Does this make you question whether you're going to support President Trump in 2020?
Well, I'm not going to go there and question whether I'm going to support, but it does, I think the president needs to be aware that, and I know Republican-based voters. I represent both Republicans and Democrats. I have a Republican district. One of the things they loved about Donald Trump is they're like, he says what he means, he's tough, he's, taking the fight to ISIS. And I'm having a hard time seeing how basically pulling out of Syria, and it's not just about protecting the Kurds, it's about getting intel and fighting ISIS. And I don't see how that's going to be a position of strength. So we'll have to see how 2020 plays out on that.
Yes, no. Should Erdogan come to the White House next month as planned?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you, Congressman. We'll be back in 1 minute.